Good people, so the Performance 1M has a lot of good things going for it. It's coming from Antec and they've been delivering some really fantastic full towers and mid towers, and their entry into the ITX space is very exciting, as evident by all the interest based on the Computex release, or more like a tease that we got to see in Taiwan. The build quality is phenomenal, the finish is nice, the red anodized steel frame on the inside is gorgeous with aluminum exterior panels. The case will be available in two color options, so black and my version here, which is the Aventurine green, which has a tiny amount of green that I'll cover later a little bit, but the red interior is really the star of the show when it comes to vibrancy and just really pop of color. It seems like there's just the right amount of attention to detail with the Antec Performance 1M. The problem becomes the timing, because we have the Era 2, we have the TERRA, we have Lee ITX directions, we have the end case that is somewhat available, and I'm worried that the red interior alone won't save this. So let's review, shall we? Now, to my surprise, this case does not come double boxed, which is a red flag for me, just because of its price point. It's, you know, in the premium ITX category. It does have some protective elements on the inside, but I would say just something to be mindful of. Hopefully it doesn't get damaged in shipping. And it's not that heavy anyway, so I'm not worried, but just kind of weird to see. Unfortunately, I had a loose thumb screw on the inside of the enclosure, which made the middle spine skewed. And at first I thought, oh no, this is gonna suck because the interior is bent, but it's not a problem. There was no damage to it, but just something to be aware of. And I was able to reseat the thumb screw properly. Antec's been made aware of this issue, and they're gonna try to make sure that this doesn't happen to you, because otherwise the frame is actually very modular. I'll show you how you can remove certain spines, and I don't understand really why, but for example, accessing the interior is just as simple of removing all the toolless panels. You have to remove the top one first in order to install, for example, your side panels. They're also on toolless pegs to reveal this very beautiful, and just I love the red. It's very bold. I'm not sure why it's kind of being hidden, but I kind of like it at the same time. Same thing for the bottom panel. And that's it. Here's our gorgeous interior. In the user manual, for example, they don't mention the need to remove any of the front panels, for example, but just for fun, for some reason, you can still do it. Just careful with these alignment pieces. I'm honestly quite surprised at how modular this whole frame is and how little mention there is from Antec about it. My theory here is they were probably trying to experiment with flat pack enclosures, of like trying to save on shipping cost, and this thing arrives disassembled and you need to build it yourself. Because this level of frame customization and disassembly is odd at this stage in this product's lifespan, because there are no additional expansions for radiator installation and etc. But that is being planned because of exactly this sort of flexible frame mount, of being able to remove certain spines in order to potentially add additional modules. So that's definitely coming later, and I'm glad that Antec is taking this proactive approach of being a super easy disassembly of 4 screws from the front panel, from the back panel, and just 2 screws to remove 1 single spine. And the entire process feels really, really premium. Like this front panel, for example, is CNC aluminum. It's got a lot of heft to it. The precision around the USB-C cutout and the power button cutout is just perfect. I mean, just the level of disassembly that is possible, this enclosure is so interesting. Like you can disassemble the front panel in 3 pieces. Why? Even the side panels can be completely disassembled by removing 6 screws to remove the black pieces of the frame. I mean, that's pretty sweet. The case feet have access to the screws that hold them in place. Again, can be removed. Super simple. Also, it's kind of hard to portray on camera, but the Aventurine 1M enclosure that I have in here is slightly green. Like the aluminum is not perfect gray. It's got a slight hint of green compared to like this piece that is slightly more neutral gray. The interior piece, for example, is a little bit more green. So all the exterior panels, aside from the front panel, have that tiny amount of green in it. It's kind of cool, but I also wish that it was more neutral gray. Honestly, this level of disassembly is super inviting for modders who potentially want to remove certain elements for painting or modding in the future. It's awesome. I was wondering why the power button had 2 tactile clicks, but looking behind the I/O, unfortunately, both of these control the power only. There is no reset switch here. And if you are interested in exploring the build quality and how all the screws feel, it's super high quality. Be my guest, and it's very easy to put this thing back together. It took me about 5 minutes, so all in all, very quick, just like this message from today's video sponsor. Montec with another insane value product, the Hyperflow ARGB AIOs, available in black or white, 240 or 360 sizes, with full platform compatibility and friendly tools along the way that not only look gorgeous with pump lighting and matching blade illumination, but also performance that should satisfy with any hot silicon thanks to high-speed fans, high-density fins on the rad, a good pump, and daisy-chain fans for easy cable management, all backed by the 6-year warranty, so you don't have to worry. Check it out below. All right, so welcome back. Definitely one of the biggest challenges with the P1M is going to be competition and hardware compatibility, because it's not that great. I mean, this whole moving the spine left to right to give you more clearance on the CPU cooler side or more width for the GPU is not new. We've seen that from the TERRA, we've seen that from the Era 2. The implementation here is decent and those 4 thumb screws are pretty accessible. The downfall for the P1M is going to be its price, its size, and lack of any water cooling support. Comparing it to the TERRA ITX from Fractal Design, which is almost half the size and volume, and it's cheaper, and it basically has very similar specifications in terms of CPU cooler. It does have slightly worse GPU compatibility, but the TERRA even has better storage support. So the P1M is kind of embarrassing on that front of being so large and not being able to accommodate as what we should expect for a new ITX release in 2025. And just to give you some reference point for the sizing, if you have not worked on the ITX enclosure before, it's roughly the size of a standard TKL keyboard plus a mouse. I mean, it's pretty compact in general, way smaller than the mid tower, but still when it comes to comparing to other ITX enclosures, it is larger. And it even gets worse when we compare it to Fractal's new Era 2, just because Fractal is smaller, it's cheaper, it can do a 280mm rad, it has slightly worse GPU compatibility in terms of length and thickness as well. And just to clarify, when we're talking about the thickness of the GPU, we're actually talking about this dimension over here. So exactly how thick is the GPU? Should be pretty straightforward and clear, although this dimension by NVIDIA is labeled as height. And for smaller cases, that specification is crucial for compatibility. So this would be the length, this would be the thickness or the width, and this would be the height. So the P1M is definitely non-fashionably late to the party, and its only saving grace is the slightly better GPU support versus the TERRA, versus the Era 2, versus the end-case offerings, just because we have a very large GPU chamber. So if all you care about is GPU compatibility in terms of length and thickness, and you can still populate a low-profile cooler from Noctua, it's good that we still have 2 120s or 140mm fan options at the bottom here for intake, and they're easily accessible and very easy to install. But at the same time, not giving us any radiator options, I feel like is going to be its downfall for sure. I mean, if you can overlook the price, and the price I feel like reflects this build quality, it's like really well made, everything feels super well put together. You can deconstruct the entire frame yourself. Everything is kind of modder friendly, but is that what people are looking for these days in the ITX space? Now with this configuration, with the SFX-L power supply, it's too close to the fans for my liking. Like actually the blades are not touching it, but we do have 2 positions for the power supply with this bracket that you can move slightly up to give you a little bit extra clearance. I don't have the spine secured, which is why it's moving so much, so don't have that as a concern. The power cable is pre-routed and it does have enough extension for you to rotate it. Like for example, in my case, let's turn it on for good measure. I do feel better about this power supply position, so the cables are not exactly touching the fan, but there's also no fan guard included, something that I wish more case manufacturers would think about. Now, given how much room we have above the power supply and how little of it we have here underneath with all the cables, I wish that Antec gave us an option to mount the power supply bracket at the bottom with the cables facing up. That would make it way easier to cable manage. I will say I love how open and big the GPU chamber is. Like installing large graphics cards is not a problem at all. It does not interfere with the frame. It does not interfere with the I/O cables. They're all underneath, out of the way for your graphics card, and plenty of space here to pass your GPU power cables. Definitely one of the biggest advantages of the P1M. And like with any sandwich style enclosure, the riser cable is always pressing on this part of the GPU, skewing the graphics card a little bit, so this section of the graphics card is closer to the side panel than over here. As usual, my least favorite thing is cable management with any ITX build, regardless of its size. Like this motherboard area is absolutely massive. There's so much room on either side of the power supply, for example. So again, optimizations in terms of space are not ideal, but all for the sake of that GPU chamber. And to give Antec some credit, there are cable tie points all around the motherboard and around the power supply. You just have to be preemptive about routing, let's say, your zip tie or your Velcro through there before you route any cables, because that'll be way easier. I do have one complaint about the spine adjustment. So we do have millimeter markings, which are easy to see, but we don't have an arrow here like we do on the top. Like, these arrows at the top are actually quite helpful to make sure that you align the front and the back correctly. Something I only noticed after the assembly has been complete is that you can see the back section of the enclosure is basically open. You can see graphics card, you can put your hand through there. So if you're worried about this not being completely airtight, that's definitely something to keep in mind. Also, some bad news about the red interior is that you cannot see it at all. Like, at certain angles, perhaps it seeks through, and I have red illumination on my motherboard right now to kind of complement the red interior. So if you don't care about the red, this is good news for you. Now, luckily for Antec, the performance in the name of this model actually means something. When we look at GPU temperatures, they're totally acceptable and quite competitive. But what impressed me the most is actually the CPU temperatures, because I am using that low profile L12S cooler, and the temperatures are 5 degrees cooler versus the best performing enclosure with the same cooler in its best configuration possible. Definitely the two bottom intake fans help a lot, and I'm actually quite surprised at the GPU temperatures, because you would think this ventilation pattern would be quite restrictive, and I think it is, but the combination with the bottom intake and this entire open back section, I think really helps with GPU temperatures. And also on the CPU side, like 70 degrees Celsius with the L12S cooler is absolutely phenomenal. And with those performance capabilities in mind, I would still say it's quite an expensive enclosure. $250. Sure, the build quality is phenomenal. It's like working with a custom mechanical keyboard in terms of like all the CNC machined aluminum pieces and all the screws. It just feels really, really good. So you almost have to expect a specific target audience for the P1M. But in reality, for this thing to actually truly shine in 2025 is that, yes, it has the biggest GPU chamber out of all the ITX enclosures that I've reviewed recently, or for the last couple of years actually. But that's it. There's no innovative radiator mount on the side. There's only a single 2.5-inch slot mount on the front, even though there's so much wasted space around the power supply, which I feel like also could have been optimized better for better cable management and easier workarounds. This is not the accessory baggie that I would expect for a $250 enclosure. They give you 5 zip ties. Come on. And it generally lacks balance in that whole like value add accessories, features, / build quality. Everything's been put into the build quality department and GPU compatibility, and everything else has been kind of put in the back burner for maybe later expansions. And I do appreciate the ability to swap out the side panels for glass, just to reveal your hardware a little bit more. But that's it in terms of the roadmap for additional accessories. So the whole modular aspect of this enclosure is more of a promise, but as we all know, never buy a product with expectations for future OTA updates, you know? And on that note, spend responsibly, my friends.